If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who claim to have seen a mythical creature, such as fairs, gnomes, etc., what is your story? So when I was a kid, I got a huge kick out of hiding in various spots around our house and then going out and scaring my mom or my sister whenever they would walk past. The challenge was finding new spots that they wouldn't see coming, but that I knew they would be at. I wanted to get a good scare, but I didn't want to have to wait an eternity for someone to come by. This only happened once and it still scares me when I think about it. I had picked a spot in our attic on this day. I knew my mom would be coming up there because she was going to get out props for a church play that we kept up there. So I set up behind a stack of boxes and waited. About 5 or 6 minutes and I heard someone very faintly say, as if me being there was interesting and maybe unexpected. The sound came from almost directly behind me and I immediately froze. Then I felt breath on the back of my neck. Now I was raised on a farm and the number one rule when encountering something that you assume you have no control over, coyotes, lynx, snakes, and the occasional irritable cow, is to not make any sudden movements. Then you slowly remove yourself from the situation and create distance without provoking whatever you are faced with. So I sat there for about 20 seconds. Stock still, absolutely terrified. After that I slowly stood up and started to move away. I wasn't about to turn and look behind me. I got 2 steps and a hand clamped down on my right shoulder. I screamed, wrenched away and ran until I was out of the house. Once outside, my mom and my sister came running to see why I was screaming. They had been outside with our dogs the whole time. My dad was at our other property almost 10 miles away. Sure, I could have imagined it. It never happened again. Nobody believed me then. My mom and dad both made multiple trips to the attic to show me nothing was up there. I don't know what it was, but it was something. Did not see anything, but every time I tell this story people say that was a fairy. This is the one and only inexplicable moment of my life. About 10 years ago I got home from school and threw my car keys on a leather ottoman in my man cave. Every day when I came home I would do this, throw keys on ottoman, turn around and go to the bathroom. When I returned from the bathroom, even though I saw my keys land on the ottoman, keys were gone. I was home alone. Maybe in the bathroom for 30 to 45 seconds. Looked all around the floor. No keys. Checked under the ottoman and couch, no keys. Lifted the ottoman off the ground and shook it over my head. No keys. At this point I convinced myself I imagined throwing my keys and I had for some reason put them on the bathroom counter. No keys in the bathroom. Turn back around. And the ducking keys are sitting right on the ottoman. There's no way. Recalling this incident gives me chills and it is the only thing in my life that convinces me of the existence of the paranormal. My daughter and I regularly and reliably saw a hide behind from my kitchen window. This eventually led to us learning the truth about this Midwestern mythical creature. What we saw was 7 to 8 feet tall, bipedal, spindly legs, gaunt with protruding rib cage, no horns or protruding ears. They would lean out from behind a tree in the forest behind our house. If you moved about, it would pop back behind the tree. We never saw more than one at a time, but there seemed to be more than one, as height varied. We sometimes saw it multiple times a day. The behavior was always the same. It seemed wary of us, but if we stayed out of sight, it would lean out into view for a few seconds at a time. When we sent the dog out, it would run off into the forest after it, but never chased it into view, so that told us nothing. I viewed it through a rifle scope, and got a good long look at it silhouetted against the snow behind the trees. It was really creepy, like a Slenderman or something. I could determine height by going out and measuring the trees we saw it next to. I of course did not shoot it, since you should not shoot what you cannot identify, and the only large bipeds hereabouts are people, though nothing human is that tall, or narrow. We knew the local legends, and this matched the description and behavior. We dug out our trail camera, but solved the mystery before we got a chance to set it up. Sorry to disappoint folks, but we solved the mystery, as I'm sure many have before us. As winter sets in, the deer like to stand on their hind legs to eat the tips of pine tree branches. They are totes scared of people, and will always do it behind trees. But every so often one that is sick, starving, had twins or gave birth too late in the season, will be desperate. The desperate ones will lean out to get the untouched branches in view of the house, but if they sense movement, they duck away. A large deer with corvid wasting disease, standing on its hind legs, is a bizarre, 8+ foot tall, skeletal looking thing, with a protruding ribs and sunken in gut. Okay, here goes. I still have no idea what this was, but I know what happened. I was 7 years old and staying at a babysitter's house. The sitter had a son whom I'll call D, and the next door neighbor had a daughter whom I'll call L. This occurred in a rural bedroom community in North Carolina back in the late 70s. Me and D used to spend most of our time at L's house next door because she had a swing set. There was a patch of woods behind their houses and train track ran through the woods directly behind the homes. I only add this detail to let you know there was nothing back behind the homes at that time other than some woods and an embankment that led down to the train tracks. L's house was surrounded by a chain-link fence that separated her parents' property from the woods. It was summer and we were in L's backyard playing on her swing set when this occurred. I was standing on the swing and pumping my arms back and forth as I faced the woods. I liked standing on the swing because it made me taller and I could see into the woods. I pumped my arms and looked up into the woods, and there was a creature that looked like a giant yellow robot from the 1950s, and it had horns and a very angry face. It was facing to my left and walking through the woods. I screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw it. When I screamed, it turned and looked directly at me. I can still see that thing's face. I jumped off the swing as D and L were yelling, "What's wrong?" I was obviously shaken and trying to tell them there was something in the woods. We ran up to the back door of L's house and yelled for her mom to come out, and I tried to tell her what I'd seen. Of course, being a rational adult, she laughed it off and told us to go play. By this time my mom had come to pick me up and I tried to tell her what I'd seen, but she also didn't believe me. Usually, when my mom arrived, she would stay and talk to L's mom or D's mom for a bit while we continued to play up until it was time for me to go home, but not that day. I refused to go back near the swings or back into the backyard. I'm in my 50s now and I've never forgotten that. I am not comfortable thinking I had a sudden hallucination, but what the hell else could it have been? It was truly terrifying, and I can still see that creature or whatever the duck it was in my mind's eye. There are a lot of scary things and just plain odd things that happened to me while growing up, but that one really scared the shit out of me. My boyfriend told me this story, and he's someone that normally wouldn't believe in this stuff or other hippie shit, but he says when he was a kid living in England, he was in his room doing homework and this little creature walked into his room, like a gnome he described it, and they just stared at each other for a minute, and he got up out of his chair to go up to it, but it ran away and disappeared into a wall. He ran off and told his mom, and she just laughed it off as you would, thought he was imagining it. But a few days later she was over her friend's house having coffee and she told her friend the story for a bit of a laugh, but then her friend turned to her and said Billy, her son, sees gnomes too. A few years back, around 16 years old, I was alone in my caravan that was my bedroom situated in the backyard of the family home. I was sitting on my bed, listening to music on my laptop when I suddenly had the impulse decision to look through the curtain directly behind me. The caravan was about half a foot away from the fence that separates our house from the neighbors, and sitting on that fence, looking straight at me, was a furious-looking toad thing. It was about a foot long, had the hugest frown on its face, a raggedy hat that looked just like the Sorting Hat from Harry Potter, and he was holding onto a long cane that had a bend in the wood where he held it. I stared at him, he stared at me. A good 30 seconds and I flicked the curtain closed and sat there a little longer. Didn't feel scared/shocked or anything, as I don't think I was actually registering what was happening. I checked about 10 minutes later and it was gone. There was no eerie feeling associated with it, no terror or fear. Just this furious-looking toad thing staring at me for a couple seconds. I can still clear as day see it in my mind. He had the angriest, almost cartoon-like frown on his face, and the wooden cane was a dark brown with swirly carvings on it. I believe in things like fairies, ghosts, all that jazz, but I'm also a rational thinking person. Yes, it could have been my imagination or brain doing a weird hallucination, but I truly do believe it was actually there and not psychological. Also, I told my best friend about it that night, and around a week later she sent me a print screen of a girl's Facebook post. I didn't know her, and neither did my friend. She was one of those girls that just added everyone for the socials, if you know what I mean, and the girl was complaining about going downstairs to get a glass of water and seeing an angry toad in the window. She freaked and ran away. To this day I've never seen another post or story similar to this online. I did ask my friend's mother, who was a witch, and she said it was based around negative energy. This happened in Melbourne, Australia. As a kid, various relatives used to take me on trips, zoo, museums, amusement park, the movies, etc. One of these trips, my grandfather took us kids to the movies. Now these old movie houses date back to the days when they had live stage entertainment, vaudeville. This old theater my grandfather took us to had an orchestra pit, even though it's never been used in decades, seeing as how vaudeville has been dead all that time. I was following my grandfather in the area between the front row seats and the orchestra pit, when just out of curiosity I peeked into the orchestra pit. There was no floor. One could see into the basement. But on the basement floor was, Well, you ever heard of the old Humpty Dumpty poem? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, etc. On the floor of the basement was a large man-sized egg with a happy face painted on its shell. It had arms and legs. It was on its back, flailing its arms and legs as if it were trying to stand up but couldn't due to its egg shape. I looked away at my grandfather for a second, then looked back into the orchestra pit. This time the painted expression on his face changed. Now the painted expression was one of grief and frustration. The eyes were closed and the mouth was in a grimace. I looked away for a brief second or so and looked back into the orchestra pit. This time there was no egg. Just the bare floor of the basement. I looked away again. Just for a few seconds. I guess looking to tell someone what I saw. But then looked back into the orchestra pit. This time the orchestra pit floor was there. I couldn't see into the basement anymore. The orchestra pit floor had only a small handful of wooden folding chairs on it. Nothing else. As the years passed, and I was going to the movies on my own, sometimes I went to that very same theater again. Each and every time I did, before the movie started, I'd go take a look into the orchestra pit. But I never saw anything like that again. Just the plain old bare floor of the orchestra pit. That old theater is now gone. A typical victim of the expansion of home video and cable TV. About 15 years ago I was leading a week-long youth group backpacking trip in the mountains of Vermont. On the last of the trip, we were in an enclosed shelter, 4 walls, roof and a door, off the main trail. After dinner the kids, for whatever reason, decided that they have a sing-along, completely out of character for them but whatever, we had a successful week. I set my digital camera to video and let it record the goofiness while they were singing Hakuna Matata and Weird Al's Albuquerque, all of it, and went to bed once they were done. Got off the trail the following day and set about cleaning my gear and wandering through all the photos and videos to put up my Smug Mug site for the families to see. Going through the videos of the sing-along, I hit something I wasn't expecting. In the gap between songs was a deep, unnatural voice asking forcefully, "Do you want to die?" It was not there during the singing because there's no way in hell they would have launched right into the next song without commenting on it. Lots of goofiness singing and that bit of WTF in the gap between songs. For extra fun around 2 a.m., one of the leader's dog, normally the goofiest, dopiest dog ever, got mistaken for a pony on more than one occasion, stood up like he was gonna bite someone and started growling incessantly with the hairs on the back of his neck standing straight up. He would not calm down for anything and got a bit snappy when I tried to move him away from the door. In the same time frame, said door into the shelter kept slamming open and closed as well despite it being a calm, moonlit night with no clouds to be seen. I tied the door shut and the dog slowly calmed down. I didn't get a lot of sleep that night, even less when I dug into the videos post-trip. No clue what the duck was out there but something wasn't happy with a large group intruding into its space. Never had that or anything remotely like that happen again on any of my trips into the mountains. Fairy at my grandmother's house. I'm Irish, we generally believe in fairies, if not belief then acceptance of others who do, we even change building and planning permission and talk about it in government. No one should ever upset a fairy tree, a single tree in the middle of a field, usually hawthorn. I saw a fairy when I was 9 in my grandmother's garden. She had a hawthorn tree in the garden and I used to leave secret treats and gifts for the fairies there. One day I was laying on top of the shed under the tree looking up and saw a fairy dance across a branch and disappear into a crack in the tree. It was very fast and looked mostly like a dirty little street urchin with dirty clothes on and no shoes and short ratty hair. I tried many times to climb over and see where it went over the course of a few years. I got scared most days because it was too high and twice I fell off the shed getting myself banned from climbing up there anymore. I remember it clearly still but anyone I've told just brushes it off as my overactive kid imagination. I believe it was real. My husband and I were driving over a viaduct 50 miles per hour, one night, around 10:30 p.m. in November, 2018. I was in the passenger seat, husband was driving. There were other cars around us, but not heavy traffic. Anyway, I see this thing, which looked like a cross between a gnome and a dwarf, with long arms, hanging well past his knees. He walked right in front of our car from the right, going to the left. I couldn't understand how and why we didn't hit it. I sat there shocked for a second, and then I see my husband shoot up in his seat, looking in the rearview mirror, and he says, "What the duck was that?" He starts telling me what he saw, exactly what I did, but he saw it directly in front of him, still going left, then he's seen it behind us, and the car behind us reacted to it as well. But they swerved to avoid it. This thing was about 3 tall. Very gruff and stubby looking, gnarly, thick features. Had a hat on, maroon vest, brownish short pants. Didn't get to see the feet. The moment I saw it, it was inches from the right front end of our car. We should have hit it. My husband saw it like a split second later, but it was in front of him on the driver's side. We should have hit it. I was young and had fallen asleep in the car. I woke up to my parents frantic in the car but were parked in our driveway. My mom was worried about something in the field, if it had rabies. My dad saying he's going to slip into the house and get the shotgun. Anyways, in the field across, illuminated by snow and moon, was this dog thing. But short hair like a poodle. It was enormous, its head would come up to the top of our Buick. Only instead of a head, was a ball. Like it was stuck in a metal ball. It was thrashing about, so maybe it was? However, no houses in the area had a dog of that size/look. We ended up getting inside. My mom called the non-emergency police line. My dad watched from the balcony. It thrashed and wiggled into the woods and the cops did a quick sweep but nothing. Years ago I went on a college field trip fairly high up in the mountains. Not deserted or anything but low population. As is my thing with any sort of travel, I took a walk around the place around 11 p.m. I just really like experiencing how places are once the bustle quiets down. As I'm walking along the main road, I approach a place with a small path to the right leading up higher into the mountains. I start to hear a buzzing but dismiss it as the altitude messing with my eardrums. But as I get closer to the path I realize that the buzzing sounds a lot like children crying. Now I don't know why, but it never occurred to me to turn around and go back. I just kept on walking. I finally approach the foot of the small path and I'm hearing a screaming chorus of weeping children. I stare down the path and, for the love of all that is holy, I don't know why I did this, shouted, "Oi, I'm just passing through." The crying stopped and I make it back to my room. Next day our advisor announced that we all had to leave after breakfast. Apparently, a few of the other students claimed to have been visited in their rooms by ghost children during the night and were in hysterics. I never told them what happened to me. To this day I don't know if I was brave, stupid, or in shock fueled by denial. I've had 3 totally different bizarre experiences in my lifetime. 1. East Central Tennessee. I was young, around 7. My sister was 5. We were living in an Amish community in the middle of nowhere. Caves are numerous. Our room was on the 2nd story. Every morning there would be a creature, once in a blue moon there were 2, that would fly by our window. It would perch on a tree not far from the house. Sometimes we would hear it land on the roof. As kids we thought it was in the attic, but thinking back, it was definitely just landing on the roof. But what was this creature? It was hairless, but not a bat. It had a large head crest and a long mouth/beak thing. For lack of a better word, it was a small pterodactyl. My sister and I didn't really have a concept of what a pterodactyl even was. But it was incredibly real, so real that my parents believed us. My dad showed us that it wasn't in our attic, but it didn't change the fact that at dawn most mornings there was some kind of creature there. My parents never saw it themselves, but my mother heard wings flapping once when she came up because we were calling her that it was in the attic, aka had landed on the roof. 2. I don't know if I can call this a mythical creature, but definitely strange. I became a substitute teacher for several counties in North Florida. One morning I was driving to a school early in the morning. The sun was already well up, it was not dark. I was on the phone with my boyfriend, and suddenly saw something, or rather didn't. There was a shape flying over the highway in the opposite direction I was driving. I say shape because it was invisible. You could just make out an outline of some kind of flying object due to how the sun was reflecting on it. The best way I can describe the shape was vaguely like a military drone. It was too small for there to be a person inside, so I imagine it was remote controlled. As it and I got closer, it seemed to shift in a way that stopped the weird sun reflection on it, and it totally disappeared. I've never gotten a good explanation for what that was. 3. My most recent mythical creature was a doppelganger. I got married to the boyfriend that I mentioned previously. He and I moved to North Central Texas due to his job, and I became a stay-at-home wife so I could work full-time on a paper that dismantled the background of a specific Christian denomination, not Amish lol. My husband was getting up at 3/4 a.m. for work. I stayed in bed and slept in. I started experiencing sleep paralysis, which was absolutely terrifying. Rather, I'm chalking it up to sleep paralysis because everything else just scares me. The first incident was strange. My husband and I were in a 1-bedroom apartment, but we had converted the bedroom into a full working office and our living room was our bedroom. The bed was near the front door. You would open the door, and the foot of the bed would be to your left. I was laying in bed starting to stir when I heard the door unlock. I opened my eyes and saw my husband walk in. He seemed very frustrated, almost angry, which was highly unlikely him. I asked him what he was doing home from work and he snapped at me. I tried to sit up, and realized I could not. I was overwhelmed by what I can best describe as a malevolent spirit. It was like something was sitting on my chest. I could no longer see my husband, but I could hear him looking for something. He found whatever he was looking for and then left, locking the door behind him. I felt myself get very drowsy, and I drifted off. I woke up some time later feeling disturbed. I got in contact with my husband, who was working for a major private company that is contracted to do government work. I asked him if he had been by that morning. He said no. I had no reason not to believe him. At the time, I thought it had just been a very vivid dream. However, that was not the only time. His doppelganger would show up frequently in the mornings after he had left. Sometimes I would feel extremely afraid, other times violated. Sometimes he would crawl in bed with me, other times I could feel him breathing on my face. I could never move my body during these encounters, and I could only open my eyes when he would initially walk through the door. The closer he would physically get to me, the more my eyes were forced to close. He never abused me in any way though. We changed our sleeping arrangements and I got on a better sleep schedule. My husband got off overtime shifts, and was able to be home during the time frame his doppelganger would show up. The doppelganger, unsurprisingly, didn't make another appearance. That is, until we moved. We moved to another apartment and my husband got a new job, though in the same vein as the last. For a little while, he was working bizarre shifts, and some mornings he had to leave very early. I remember hearing the door unlock and hearing his footsteps walk through our apartment. However, the difference was that I could feel the same presence as before. The last day the doppelganger ever showed up was around 2 years ago. This time I heard the door open and multiple entities entered. I was filled with more fear than ever before. They felt genuinely evil. They were there to hurt me. My entire body was trembling. I also could feel the doppelganger there. Despite him still feeling malevolent, I could also feel that he was feeling protective of me. The bedroom door opened and the doppelganger was arguing with the other entities. I remember him distinctly saying that they were not allowed to hurt me. The entities did not speak direct words, but I could tell that they had been attracted to me because he kept showing up. He drew them there, intentionally or not. He told them he would never come to me again if they left. They fought and argued, but eventually there was some kind of agreement. They all left through the front door. I got up out of bed. My bedroom door was open and the front door was unlocked, bizarre because I had locked the door when my husband had left for work that morning, and I always closed the bedroom door. The doppelganger has never appeared since then. I'm not sure what to make of all this. Oh, I have one. This isn't exactly in the vein of fairies or gnomes, but it was something strange. I was snorkeling in Ireland a few years ago when out the bottom corner of my mask I saw a light, like my visor was literally lit up, like someone had shone a bright torch up at me. When I turned in its direction I found a small fish sat on the seabed and it was incredible. It had a longish serpent-shaped body that was bright gold and shiny. But more beautiful were the fins that jutted out of its sides. They were like large peacock emerald fans, each one as long as its body and wide. The entire animal shone like it was lit up or like it was made out of shiny metal. You know when metal just catches the light right and reflects it back at your eyes, it was that sort of effect. But there was more luminosity than its small size made sense for. It glowed. I wouldn't have believed it was real except it moved its fins or tail lazily every so often. When I took out my snorkel and dived towards it to investigate more, I suddenly realized I was out much deeper than I intended to be, and the small fish was probably not that small at all but large and just far away. The difference between 6 feet and 20. Where I was snorkeling is quite famous for rip tides created by the swell framed by 2 rocky outcrops. I panicked a little and surfaced. The beach was stressfully distant and I had been gradually dragged out. I tore myself away from the fish and headed back. I was shaken. When I got back I explained what I saw to my dad, who is an expert all things ocean and angler. He kind of waved away what I said about it glowing but was stumped by my description. He thought maybe a weird colored, I guess he thought I was exaggerating the intensity of its coloration, Grenard, but I'm very familiar with them and it was the wrong shape and wrong everything. I even grabbed a pen in frustration and drew it. I still have the drawing somewhere, and he couldn't account for it at all. I searched the internet, books, everything and never come across anything like what I saw. I don't know what it was, maybe a rare species or, like my dad said, some very rare coloration and mutation of one? But I can see it in my mind still, and honestly, it was like bumping into a mythological creature. It was that stunning and unreal. It wasn't golden, it was gold and lit up the sea around it. I'm not exaggerating and time hasn't just built it up in my head. I know what I saw, I just can't explain it. One day my husband and I had 2 friends over. We were all sitting around chatting in the living room. They were on the couch and we were on chairs facing them, and there was a coffee table between us. Anyway, as we were chatting, this white, partially transparent figure about 2 feet tall walked through the outside wall and walked between the coffee table and the couch. It just faded away once it got past the table. What makes it even weirder is, I kid you not, it was shaped like David the Gnome, that show we watched as kids. But it was kind of a wispy white. We all were like, "Did you see that?" We had all seen things, and I was part of a paranormal group, so we all wrote down what we saw separately and compared notes. We all saw the same thing. In that house we would also see black wisps and white wisps float through the air. If they hit a cabinet, the cabinet would shake. There were many more of the black ones, but we'd see the white ones on occasion. It was a weird house. Once I was afraid of the sun going down, as it meant that I had to sleep soon. Attempting to sleep would cause me to feel things crawling on or around me. As this progressed, it would get worse and worse. At first it was small things grabbing, touching my face, laying next to me where I could feel their weight against me. It evolved into feeling small animals going across my bed above my head area, eventually little feet like mice stepping over my face, sitting on my head. I would swat at them, eyes closed, until I felt it leave. At times it would be birds sitting on my pillow pecking my head. Then it got worse. I would go to bed and wake up. I learned to keep my eyes closed after waking up to not see these things that would be there, as they would notice me sometimes and scream in my face and leave bruises and claw marks in my collarbone skin. One particular morning I woke and could feel this woman, who sounded elderly, grabbing me by my neck, desperately trying to get me to open my eyes and look at her face. I did once and was subjected to a horrific vision of a rotting woman whose face and hands were rotten and nearly skeletal, her eye sockets filled with decayed flesh and eye nerves. She would always make a deafening scream when I saw her face. I feared waking up and loathed sleeping. It always ended up that way. After something miraculously happened during one of these nights of horror. Instead of the frightening mice and rotting old woman, I saw a tall humanoid being. She had feminine features but was tall, no wings, but terribly bright red eyes. She only stared, hovering over me next to my bed. After this encounter I never once had a bad encounter at night trying to sleep. I believe that the figure was a banshee, and was warning me of the impending hardship about to befall my family, as we were evicted a little while afterwards and made homeless. It was only later that I learned Irish descendants supposedly all have a connection to a banshee that watches their family and gives them warnings of bad omens. Ever since then I've prayed to this being for the last 5 years, give or take, every time before I sleep, as thanks for riddance of those nights of horror. It's such a small thing with no explanation that had impacted me ever since, and I haven't got to share it without skepticism from those willing to listen. Back in summer of 2013 I worked at the Pomona Valley Hospital. Hats off to the men and women there helping serve the sick. I was a contracted guard. Didn't really do much other than stand around on the graveyard shift, and only place that ever stayed busy was the ER. It always had something going on. I mean, this was Pomona. Nightly stabbings, car accidents, and various other things that put your insides outside were normal. Anyway, one night, like all the rest, I was standing guard by the ER doors, directing visitors and anyone else that needed assistance. Then early that morning, maybe around 3? I honestly don't remember. A patient in a gown walks through a set of double doors that normally only open for doctors with a badge. I figured a doctor buzzed her through as she walked right by me, looking lost and a bit confused. I called out and asked if she need help finding something. She turned, smiled at me, and rush of noise hit me as doors started moving and doctors starting moving around their day to day. I blinked and she was gone. I called out over the radio about what I'd seen, and the control checked the feed. Sure enough, there I was standing out an empty corridor, except when I called out I was alone. What's twice as weird is that night had been particularly busy, and that 5 or so minutes I experienced never happened. I was very clearly awake in the video feed too, looking around doing my thing. The period of time that it took for the doors to open and for me to call out was a couple of seconds. I vividly remember the whole experience being a few minutes long. I asked around, never got a straight answer to explain it. Everyone's seen something though. That hospital's old. I saw a ghost. My grandparents described it as a gnome, but hell no, that was a full-on spirit. Once I was vibing with my cousins on my grandparents' farm, on a place where we could see the border to the other farm. It was said that bad stuff happened on that farm. Anyway, we were hanging on there, on my uncle's car, and then we turn around. We see this humanoid silhouette standing there. It was the size of a kid but with the proportions of an adult. It shined white and yellowish like if you saw straight to a LED light, but it didn't hurt the eyes and it didn't emit light either. For some reason I knew that he was staring at us even if he was just a silhouette, and for some reason I know it was a he. We had a guard dog at the time, and we tell him, "Hey Paco. Paco. Look at there, attack. Bark. Something." Dog looks at the silhouette dead in the eye and whines and turns around. He ran away. We also used out little cousin as a bait because he was trashing us for being scared of it like if it was the most common thing for him. He just walked to the house and left us. After a while the creature was gone and we ran to the house. I never saw him again, and to this day I wonder who was the spirit. I really hope he found peace. This is ABT, a dream I had a month or so ago. Here goes. A creature that stands tall as the predator, something like a Cthulhu but humanoid, came out of the sea as the sea levels rose due to global warming, and it spoke to me in Omen language, but I understood it. It said that it was an incarnation of Vishnu here to punish the wicked, and said he needed me by his side when the time came. Nobody believes me, but when I was around 6 years old I might have seen a Sasquatch or a giant. I was camping in the mountains with family and family friends. I left some snacks in a pocket that was outside the tent I had. Later that night I woke up for some weird reason, probably because it was cold, and everybody was asleep. Just then I heard footsteps outside. Whatever was walking was huge because it sounded heavy, and nobody in the camping group was big or stocky. The thing walked past the tent and I saw its enormous shadow. It looked like it was rummaging around, but I paid no attention because I was still half asleep, and I eventually fainted back to sleep. The next morning I woke up, and when I was about to get the snacks from outside, it was gone. I asked around if anyone took my food, but nobody answered. Just recently I heard news of prominent sightings of weird cryptids around that same mountain range. To this day I swear to everyone what I saw was genuine. I know, you may think it's because I was a kid screwing around, but I still vividly remember that night. It felt all too real to be my imagination. I saw a Wendigo, or just a weird skinny, large humanoid thing with hooves when I was 15, so about 3 years ago. I just moved into my new apartment in Benissa, Spain, where I still live. I found out that about 800 meters away there's a really dense pine forest that is full of animals. I began going there almost daily because being there really calmed me down, and it was an amazing place to meditate and do nature photography. Well, after about 2 weeks of going almost daily, I saw that at the end of a stone wall there was a secret staircase that if you went down and walked a bit you got to this open space that was surrounded by huge pine trees. When I got there the sun hit just right on top of that open space. So I stood in the middle and put of nowhere all the sound was just gone. The hundreds of birds and insects you would hear all the time were just gone. The hair on my back stood up when pretty far away, through the pine trees, I could see a biped humanoid creature with lots of hair on its legs. By the looks of it, it was maybe 8 to 9 feet tall. I immediately turned around and ran back, but within seconds I could hear it right behind me, even though it was maybe 100 meters away just seconds ago. I just kept running and got to the road, still hearing the stomping behind me. When I fell down, I turned my head instantly and there was nothing. Still to this day I have no idea what happened, and I've only told a handful of people. I take it that a lot of people on here have heard about creepypasta and especially Slenderman. This happened about last year during the summer. It was about 10 p.m. and my mom had just gotten off of work. Normally when she gets off of work on summer nights we will normally sit outside for a while. Well, when she had gotten back that night she went to the bathroom because her stomach was upsetting her. I figured I would just wait outside till she got back. As I waited I decided to look at some creepypasta stories. Mainly the ones with Slenderman. As I look up I look around the empty streets when I suddenly see this pale figure. I look closer and see he was wearing a suit and had no face. I felt myself drop my phone and blink to see if it was real. When I opened my eyes again he almost seemed a little closer. I felt my heart drop when suddenly I heard my mom say she was finally coming out. I looked over to the door when she had come out and then looked back to the spot where I had seen that thing, but he was gone. This is the first time I ever told this story and it still freaks me out that I saw that thing. Do UFOs count? I'm not convinced it was a UFO. I'm one of those there's probably a reasonable explanation sorta guy when it comes to the paranormal, so I'm like 80% sure I was mistaken / my brain was just short-circuiting. Anyway, I was walking down the street one night and it was clear skies. I live in Maine so the stars are out if it isn't cloudy, minimal light pollution. I look up at the sky and there is what looked like a star just chillin', you know, like stars do. This thing was stationary for about a second or two when I looked up. All of a sudden it just goes from being stationary to just taking off across the sky. It was fast, too. Just looked like a normal bright star that just decided to zip off somewhere else. I believe in extraterrestrial life. Not necessarily little green men type, but some sort of life form has to exist somewhere else. After all, we exist. Never got why some people think would it be unthinkable for some form of intelligent life to exist when we're intelligent, sentient life living here on Earth. As I said, I'm sure it was just a trick of the mind. Perhaps it was a meteor or satellite that just appeared stationary when my eyes met it. Either way I was taken aback by it. That's the closest I've ever come to seeing something paranormal with my own eyes. Context: the Banshee is an Irish myth that goes around at night taking lives of people that are sleeping. I am Irish. My granddad is the third of 3 brothers. One night, when my granddad was still a baby, everyone was asleep except for brother number 2, Jack, 5. Jack was lying in bed unable to sleep and everything was silent. All of a sudden, he heard a blood-curdling scream and almost fell out of his bed. Terrified, he ran to his parents' bedroom and shook his mum, but she wouldn't wake up however hard Jack shook. So he looked at her, and only then he saw. Her face was pale with a blank expression and didn't seem to be breathing. He just knew it. She was dead. How Jack and Patty were not scarred for life is astounding to me. I don't know how you can take the loss of one of your most important people at such a young age. We still don't know how my great-grandma died, but our best explanation is that she was taken by the Banshee. I just have to trust Jack's story as there is no other evidence. There are quite a few definitions for what the Banshee is, e.g. Sergeant Ducky says it's when a married lady gains a zombie-like personality when their husband goes away for too long and they go to other houses, begging for their husband to come back, or something along those lines IDK, but I think it's a ghost that just scavenges the emerald while looking for an Irish soul to steal. Jack and my granddad are still alive and willing to tell the story. Patty passed away. I am part of a happy family that can see each other and love each other in every way, but nothing can deny the dark history. Not real elf, but when I was in 6th form I went on a school trip to Iceland. Imagine 12 city kids from a strict Catholic school on a minibus with a tour guide who starts talking about elves and how most Icelandic people believe in them. We all generally thought she was having us on and she was going to say she was joking, but our teachers shot us the look and we realized she was being serious. Fast forward a few hours and we arrive at a beautiful waterfall. I don't remember the full details, but she basically says there's an elf guarding the waterfall and you can see it in the ground formation. She was absolutely right. A huge elf embedded next to the waterfall as if placed there by magic. That opened our minds to other people's beliefs for sure. I don't exactly know what creature it was, but anyway, here is my story. If anyone knows what it was, let me know. When I was in the 5th grade we went on a trip with our school to this hostel at the edge of a forest. Me and the kids in my room, we did the usual thing of saying we saw something at the edge of the forest. One night we did it again and we had already gotten a bit paranoid and sometimes thought that we actually saw something, and on this night we suddenly all saw this pair of purple glowing dots at the edge of the forest. At first we thought it was probably just a reflection or something until those dots disappeared and reappeared about 10 meters to the right. When they reappeared we could visually make the outer edges of the creature's body, which looked somewhat human. The eyes then turned to the right and this second pair of purple eyes appeared. At this point we were really scared. It got worse when we realized those dots, or probably eyes, were looking at us. From our window to the forest where those creatures were standing it was like maybe 15 to 20 meters. We sat there looking at them for about 10 minutes until those creatures turned around and left. To this day I don't know what I saw at the edge of the forest and what they were doing so close to us. I am a wishful skeptic. Every haunting case I've researched, or report, or paranormal activity tied to a book deal or movie basis or failed attempt to cash into James Randi's never successfully claimed paranormal challenge to me as a study of the human condition, are want to believe, be unique, be heard, or others providing logic, generosity, and their wants for it to be true. However, the one in my family is odd in that no one wants to talk about it, and my father, who would happen to want talk about it point blank. We'll summarize. My father's mother told me about this, and my father will not talk about it. His state of mind: Hess, a war vet, former Marine survival instructor, Desert Storm/Desert Shield infantry vet, so he has seen some horrid things, tragic things, but all grounded in the evil that men can do, or just tragic civilians or military accidents. Before he enlisted, as a late teen, early 70s, he and his cousin Eddie were driving at late night in the back rural county in California and picked up a hitchhiker, a girl that seemed around their age. At that time it was not wholly unknown to do so, but it was already not as common due to rising crime, etc. The conversation was a bit off with her. With Eddie driving the car, my father was talking with this girl, until he looked at her reflection in the mirror. What he saw just sort of took his breath away, not in a good way, but a panic, a dread froze him where he sat. In the reflection of the girl he was speaking to, what was looking back at him was not human, nor humanoid. It resembled something of a sinister goat. As he looked at it, it looked at him. What terrified him most was its eyes, and that it smiled back at him. The ride ended quickly and the girl was dropped off at a house not far from where she was picked up, by her own instruction. To this day my father will not speak of it, but in looking at what has happened to him, what Hess seen, what Hess had to do, it's not known to the family if this was a bad night. Was it a harbinger, something potentially worse? If ghosts and stuff count, I got lots of stories. So I've lived in multiple houses that were legitimately haunted. I'm gonna tell you some of the stories from those houses. So my dad used to have this cat, and when it died, he buried it in the backyard instead of like a pet cemetery or SMTH. And after that, me and my brother would always say that we saw cats walking on the ceiling. Another story from the same house. One time my mother heard me crying on the baby monitor. She was about to get up to check on me when she heard my dad's voice through the monitor, calming me down. My dad was in the kitchen the whole time. Another story, different house this time. So we lived near an old abandoned house, and so my grandfather, one of the cheapest PPL I know, decided to steal some stuff from the abandoned house. Not long after he did so, me and my brother had described a sad old man walking around in our yard looking for something. Many of our house guests that visited that house also reported seeing shadows walk across the halls when nobody was there. I've got more, but if I listed them all, this comment would end up as long as the Holy Bible. So bye.